KR King, helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. So today is my final video on the Dungeon of the Mad Mage level 4. And this is where I talk about the 5 kind of features that I have identified when you are deconstructing a mega dungeon module like you have in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. To look at in terms of designing your own dungeons, but also to think about how you're going to run this module, think about how you're going to play each of these features in terms of the player's encounter in the dungeon. And these features are the entrances and exits, the necessity to explore the entire level of the dungeon, the composition of forces, major villains, and other that the players are going to have to confront, the interlevel connections on the dungeon in terms of the layers that the players have already explored and those beneath them, the resource drain encounters that are used with no information and no treasure. But this is going to be a little bit different than some of the previous GM secrets because I did 2 videos in this series, one on gates in general that goes over the gates, which are a very vital part as you get deeper and deeper into the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And then I also talked about some of the major NPCs because I had a section on thinking of ways to run NPCs such that it isn't just attack and fight. So I'll be going over the same 5 features that I always do, but kind of in a little bit different way, reflecting the fact that I already covered those earlier. So in terms of entrances and exits, I covered the gates and the front entrance last time, the exit as well, but I will make a remark upon this exit, which is this tributary called River of the Depths. It's a tributary to the Sargoth River. This is the only way to make a conventional exit from the 4th level dungeon. I say conventional because, of course, you do have the gate system. But here's the thing. If the players are 8th level, as recommended when they come down to this 4th level dungeon, even if they take a gate from the 2nd to the 4th, they're not going to be able to use the gate in room 10 to get out of here. So they're going to have to exit through this river exit. Unless, of course, they want to go back to level 2 in room 12, the Dwarven Forge area, and take a gate that will take them down to a barricaded room, I think 3B, on level 5. Now, again, the mechanic of this, how do the players know how the gates work with this hard level concept? Because, again, in the world of D&D, you don't go around going, hey, I've got a 5th level badge, look at me, or, my thing glows. So, as I mentioned, you might have something where the players do a ritual and detect magic or something and is identified such that it tells them this level or tells them when you pass the gate, you'll know whether you have the experience, something like that. Again, if that hasn't occurred and the players aren't scared off the first time they try, presumably if they've come to this on a gate, they've discovered the whole Elder Runes and the Boon or Bane, which can really be a pain, but can be a good thing too. They're going to use this exit. And the thing about this exit is it's not really given in the book. It just says a series of rapids and waterfalls. Would the players be able to wade this? Again, the river Sargoth, at least, is described as being, a few feet deep to 30 feet deep. We can talk about the realism of, swimming in a river, certainly rapids or going down a waterfall if you're wearing armor, very difficult. Not really discussed too much in 5e, but common sense says that's going to be difficult, perhaps in a fantasy setting. That's okay. But to me, having only one exit, and it is this kind of river, undefined distance, waterfalls, I think I might avoid that. I know it's not absolutely necessary, but the idea that they have to go back through, and then there's another question. They're going back up from here to level 2. Maybe they go out and leave and level up or buy things or whatever. But if not, again, you've got always that back and forth. Is Hallister restocking these rooms? The random monsters. And now you've got time. And time is a precious thing when you're running D&D. If you've got a 3 or 4 hour block, once a week, once a month, something like this, to waste time doing that, do you just say, okay, you go to the 2nd level and then you come down to the 5th? Okay, but why not just have an exit that isn't so daunting or so potentially, unrealistic? And on a side note, I have looked up on Reddit, I'm on some groups, the Dungeon of the Mad Mage group and some others where people have talked about running. And, leaving the dungeon and coming back. And there are groups that never leave the dungeon. They start at the 5th level, they go all the way to Hallister, 17th level, and then presumably they're 20th when they beat Hallister on the 23rd level. Now, this is a little video gamey for me. I suppose you create food and water and do some of these things, but just level up when you level up. And again, on the post I saw on this, they said we all had a great time. The players loved it, the GM loved it. So that is one way to do this. All right, so then we have the desire or need to explore an entire level. Usually this occurs, absolutely if there's information or some device or something that if you don't have, you stop dead in your tracks. I don't do that kind of thing. They don't really do it in the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, but I'll say that I usually play with completionist type players. They want to explore every room in a dungeon, and if they're mapping it and there's a big blank area, they're like, there's something, a secret door, and they search for those. Because they want to get as much experience if you're playing, in terms of encounters with monsters, whether you defeat them, kill them, or they run away, but also treasure items. So here are the treasure rooms on this level. 14 treasure sites. 3 are guarded by the drow, 2 by the aboleth. The rest by creatures that are pretty, beatable by the recommended group for 8th level characters. You also have the Kuo-Toa Archpriest, who has the gem that is the control gem for the slot in room number 7. And of course, Area 24, you've got 18 troglodytes that are enslaved by the aboleth. They have no treasure, no information, just kind of a resource drain, as we'll see. There is an added aspect now in terms of exploring an entire level that the players will have discovered, which is the gates. They've now seen that there are multiple gates on some levels. This means just finding one. You may want to explore every nook and cranny, every secret area to make sure you haven't missed a gate. And this is the kind of cool thing about having this kind of means. Not only does it allow the players to move multiple levels in a dungeon, but it gives them an incentive to look at everything. So if you're putting together a dungeon and you've got this gate concept, or elevator, or whatever. Maybe the elevators only go certain levels. You're sort of, mimicking the gates. It gives that impetus, that incentive for the players to look for everything. All right, so now we come to composition of forces. As I mentioned, I already talked about this in the last video in terms of NPCs and monsters, how you might have an encounter that isn't just a battle. Melith, the drow priestess, wants to see the aboleth and the Kuo-Toa fight it out and then pick over the remains. So she's eager to have any adventurers that come along. She'll direct them towards there. Her consort, Thyrza, is not as into this. She's going to give this information to Melith's mother and, basically say, hey, he's negotiating with people, letting them into the dungeon, and this is going to cause trouble later on. But if we think about maybe the players are going to just fight the drow. So if they come through the conventional entrance, they're going to wrap their way around. They might encounter the drow in areas 11 or area 12, and in theory maybe it's split up. But they say the moment they run into any trouble, just like earlier levels, they send out the signal and they all come running. And then, of course, you've got the players coming right in through the gate into room 11C. Now they're in the midst of the drow. So if they try to fight them, they're going to start with some drow, but they're going to come running. So what about this? Well, you do have 4 8th level characters and possibly more depending on how you're running this. 8th level, by this time you've got 2 either ability advancements, ability bumps, 4th and 8th, or 2 feats if you're using the feats. Those can be nice. You've got 2 4th level spells. You've also got some, clerical domain bumps. What else do you have? The druid gets a better shape change, some other things. So could they take on this entire group? Oh, it's still pretty tough. The drow priestess and the drow mage have 5th level spells. You got 4 drow elite warriors that are pretty nasty, 4 normal drow, and then you got 8 quaggoths that come running. Now they're coming out of this crevasse. They're not necessarily going to get there right away. So if you have area spells or some save or suck, or you've got fighters, martial characters that are really advanced, they can really do a lot of damage in a few rounds. It's possible to have a battle in which you either defeat the drow or cause them to run away. So it is something to think about. Again, it's recommended that the players probably should just negotiate, but it's possible. So I talked about the aboleth, and I said my issue, we don't run it very often because it's always described as being deep under the sea in some elaborate complex. It has its enslaved thralls doing its work on the surface. But here you do have this freshwater pond that it's created, a river system, and the players can come across it. But the question is, how does what does the aboleth do? It doesn't want them to fight. I mentioned the phantasmal projection, but what's going to happen if the players fight the drow? Would it fight them on land? So first of all, it has its 5 chuls that are very nasty creatures, as I mentioned in the last video. It has 18 troglodytes. A lot of them are down in area 24. They're not very useful, not even as cannon fodder. Now, the aboleth does have some incredible abilities, but, would it just do this on land? Because would it try to get the players to come into the water where it's, king, as it were? Because it does have a sea cave that you could only enter through the water where it could lie in wait. And it also says the pond is 50 feet deep, so it could sit down there or whatever. But think about an aboleth. It has an 18 intelligence. All this knowledge from, everything it's absorbed, so battle tactics. It seems to me, and 120-foot dark vision. So if it's going to fight, even above the surface, it's going to find itself, there's some obstructions and whatnot in this cavern. I think it would wait, and then because 3 times a day it can enslave. DC 14, if you have a player that doesn't have such a great, wisdom save, there's an opportunity there. And of course, if for some reason the players have to swim under the Kuo-Toa, say, hey, there's the sea cave down here, this is where the aboleth has its treasure or something, and they swim. Now you've got the mucus that surrounds it. If you strike it, again, DC 14 con save, you're poisoned. It can, using its tentacles, it can cause your skin to be translucent. Again, a save, and otherwise, when you're out in the air every 10 minutes, you take acid damage. And the thing is, after a minute, if you get sick, you need a heal or other 6th-level spell to cure this. So why would the aboleth necessarily get up on the island or on land? Why wouldn't it stay in the water? Now, if it's looking out of the water, the players are in a boat, let's say, which is another sort of murky, you're in a rowboat or a raft. You're vulnerable to going in that water. But even if they're on land trying to blast away, it has this ability to create a tide that comes up and can knock the players prone and then pull them back 20 feet into the water. And the aboleth, being so smart, with an 18 intelligence, it's got 135 average hit points. You may roll something different. If it's going to get low, it can go into the water and, in theory, go away. It's connected to the river to fight another day. And then we have our cross-level intertextuality, or basically linkages between the levels. When you have a multi-level mega dungeon, the idea here to make it a living dungeon, a dynamic dungeon, that there would be connections, things moving up and down. Here you have the drow as the major players. None of the other creatures here really seem to interact with the levels. And then Halaster, he's not really mentioned here in the text of this, but I would make Halaster a constant presence. When, let's say, the players use the gate, he says something, he appears, he goes, oh, you're using my gates, how wonderful. Or to comment on the action. Because if you're going to have this all-encompassing figure, this Halaster, the Mad Wizard, the dungeon is named for him, at times I just might think that he would appear and he would provide that unifying force on all the levels. So you have the static versus dynamic dungeon. That is, do you have monsters that it's clear they're just sitting around waiting for the players to come? They're in the midst of some activity or something where really just so happens we're there at that point? Or does it all make sense in terms of they're here on this level, they're interacting with things nearby? And here it's a little murky. You have this green slod who goes as the alchemist, and he's looking for this control gem that's down in area 21. Kuo-Toa Archpriest has put it in the head of his statue that he's building, and of course the slod really wants this gem. But he's not really, what is he doing to get it? He's just there selling potions. I guess he's waiting for someone to come along who's found the gem and then wants to trade it for a potion, I suppose. But it's not really explained. Halaster tricked it there or got it there. He doesn't want to tell anybody that. You also have Daredith, the Mad Wizard in Area 7. She's sitting on a toadstool with the Quasit that's, driving her insane. Presumably she's been sitting here until the players arrive. Nothing has harmed her. You do have wandering monsters, other adventurers. Do the drow wander around? Again, how she could survive, it does have some spells. I would say here it's not too unrealistic, because if you look at her spell book and you think that even an insane character has a survival instinct, she could potentially survive. The aboleth seems to be just here. They arrived recently. How it got here up the river, why it chose these caverns. Here's this creature that wants to take over the oceans once again. It's in this kind of measly little pond. Maybe Hallister's brought it there. It doesn't say. It doesn't tell in the text. You might want to think this is a major monster. It's got legendary abilities, lair features. It's poisoned within a mile radius, which doesn't really, I guess there's miles on either side, so all the water here is poisoned. Whereas the Kuo-Toa and the troglodytes, it makes sense that they're allowed by Hallister to stay here because they're no threat to him. The Kuo-Toa are crazy. The troglodytes are troglodytes. And just as the drow provide the linkage between the levels, here they are, the most dynamic force, whether they negotiate with the players or they fight them and run off, because presumably they would, because they've got, power centers above and below. All right, our final category are resource drain encounters. These are ones that have no information, no treasure. They're just basically the price for traveling through the dungeon. And here you've got the usual suspects. It's a cavern, so you've got 8 piercers in room number 3 that can fall on the players. Now, there is a path, if they can, I think it's passive perception, or if they investigate, they can see a path around the stalactites that'll fall. You've got 2 dark mantles in room 14. Now, in theory, there are 2 rafts there, if you call that treasure. The players would need them. And the troglodytes, as I mentioned before, in area 24, there's 18 of them. They don't have any treasure, any information, but they're enslaved by the aboleth. So if you hit them, every time they get a chance to make the save again, and if they do happen to make it, they run away. So the other thing, you do have some cool little kill them and get some treasure. You got 2 Zorns that have these crystals, fist-sized crystals, 40 of them worth 10 gold apiece. And you got 2 ropers. Ropers can be nasty, but they have 1d4 gems, and each gem is worth 100. And the nice thing, unlike the fist-sized crystal, the gems, we assume, are not super big. Depending on what your encumbrance situation is in your world, if you keep track of that. I have, starting to play Fantasy Grounds, that automatically tracks encumbrance, and suddenly you start to see, well, it's hard to carry all this stuff. Again, those players that are going down every level and never returning to turn in their treasure or, whatever, store it. All right, so there you have my take on, the 5 building blocks, design features that I think about when I'm deconstructing a modules dungeon and when I'm building my own. If you like the content on my channel, please subscribe. I'm always looking for more. Leave some comments because I love to read them and to respond. But most importantly, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.